Pastor Todd reminded me, don't forget to turn your mic on before you go up. And of course I forget. Oh, okay. You can tell I'm a youth pastor, right? I'm just like frazzled all the time. Well, my name is Brittany. I am the youth pastor and young adults pastor here. Good morning to everyone who is joining us online and everyone in the room. Love being here with you this morning. So I want to take us back to February 1974. When a detective in Washington State named Detective Capel received the first dossier of information. He received a file on his desk of a woman who had disappeared. Her name was Linda, and he was trying to sort through all of the files, trying to figure out where she was, or what was more likely, who her murderer was. It wasn't long until a couple months later he received 2 more files on his desk. This time, it was one woman who had an attempted kidnapping, and thankfully she got away, but didn't have too much information about her kidnapper. And the other one was a much more horrible fate of a woman who was murdered once again. And this time, Capel noticed some things that looked familiar. There was some consistencies in these cases, and he knew that they were from all the same person, all the same criminal, but he couldn't quite figure out what was going on. A couple months later, in a couple of states over in Utah, Detective Thompson received another file on his desk. And this file was of 2 more cases of women who had been brutally murdered. One was a high schooler in the high school parking lot. Over the next couple of years, 20 more files would be added to the detectives' desks of women who had been murdered so brutally. And it took 4 years before Ted Bundy was identified as the murderer, found, and arrested in 1978. It took 4 years. Over 30 women had been victim to his crimes, but it's believed that it could have been up to maybe even 100 women they don't actually know were victim to him. And the question that everyone was asking was, where was he this whole time? 4+ years of the most brutal crimes, and it took so long for the detectives to figure out where he was. But the whole time, he was just hiding in plain sight. See, Ted Bundy, he had the advantage of he was a pretty handsome bloke. He looked okay. He had a really charming personality. He had that kind of personality where you trusted him right away, and he had the appearance where he could just simply blend in. He attended classes as a law student. He worked at a suicide hotline crisis center. He volunteered for political campaigns. He earned scholarships. He had girlfriends. He dressed respectable and professional. He looked so normal. And every day, he passed hundreds of people. And yet no one knew that he was at the time the most horrific serial killer in the whole country. And in the same way, we also have an enemy who operates under this mask of deception, who is hiding in plain sight. In 1 Peter 5:8, it says, "Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." In 2 Corinthians 11:14, it says, "Satan disguises himself as an angel of light." See, there's an enemy in our midst, hiding in plain sight. And because of this, God gives us very clear instruction of what we are supposed to do about this in Ephesians 6. Ephesians 6:10-12, it says, "Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." The real enemy, he's out there and he's prowling. He's disguising himself. And we need to be aware of him. And we need to be aware of him, and we need to know who he is in order to know, why are we commanded to put on this full armor of God? Why are we commanded to be prepared? Why are we commanded to take captive every thought? We need to know who our enemy is. And so today we're becoming investigators. And we're going to open up the dossier files and information of what we have on the devil. We're going to look at the names, the origin, the background, the record of crime, and the habits, anything and everything that will help us to identify who our enemy is. So the question we are asking today is question 39 in our Echoes Catechism in a Year series. What is the devil and are demons real? And if you're a note taker, you can pull out the Riverwood app and you can take all of your notes there for if you want to look back at the information later time. But I think this kind of message, it deserves a bit of a disclaimer here. See, we are identifying and becoming aware of an enemy who is dangerous and has done the most horrific, tragic, and heartbreaking things throughout history. He has committed the most murders. He has torn the most families apart. He has convinced the most people that they don't deserve to live. He has caused the most childhood trauma. He has been the harshest dictator. He has been at the head of the most horrific rebellions. And he has accused and harmed the innocent. Yet, he has been caught. And he has been defeated. And when it comes to God and the devil, God will always have the upper hand. And so we look at this information not with a fear inside of us, but with courage in the one who provided us with the information, saying, you're going to need this to be able to fight in this life. But we remember that we do not fight for victory. We fight from it. And the second disclaimer is that we need to stay between the lines when we are studying the enemy. C.S. Lewis said it this way: there are two equal and opposite errors in which our race can fall about the devils. One is to disbelieve in their existence. The other is to believe and feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. We want to prove the devil's existence. We want to prove that there is an enemy that is dangerous, that we must put up our armor against, but we must not lose sight over the God who actually has already won. And so, we open up the first dossier of information today, and the first dossier is status. Now, this might feel like this is an obvious thing, but the enemy is alive. Charles Baudelaire said, "The greatest trick the devil has ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist." And that he has done, and he has done this well. A poll of Canadians done by Gallup in 2004 asked the question, do you believe the devil is real? And they found that 63% of Canadians said that they did not believe the devil existed. Astonishing number, 63% of the people in our country don't believe that the devil is real. And that was 20 years ago. And if we know anything about cultures, it's just become more secular as time has gone on. But I couldn't find any more recent studies done in Canada. But Gallup also did a study of Americans. And they did a comparison between 2004 and 2023. And what they found was that in 2004, 30% of Americans didn't believe the devil existed. So this is compared to the 63% in Canada. And we know that Canada is a much more secular culture than in the States. And in 2023, that number rose 12% to 42%. So what we find from these stats is the devil has convinced an insane percentage of the North American population that he doesn't even exist. You know, in World War II, the Japanese soldiers that had this really chilling tactic. And what they would do is that they would go out to a battlefield and they would bury themselves under the ground. Or they would go and they would find piles of bodies and they would lay with those bodies. And what they were trying to do was that they were waiting for unsuspecting enemy soldiers to come and start to search the bodies and look for valuables and count the dead. And so they would lie there and wait. Sometimes it was hours, sometimes it was days. They would lie there. And when the opposing soldiers would come, they were so unexpected and caught off guard because they thought everyone was dead. And they did not see it coming when the Japanese soldier would grab a live grenade and throw it, and it would become a deadly ambush. And sometimes it's as if our enemy is playing dead. Sometimes it's as if he is just lying there, pretending that he doesn't exist, pretending that he is lifeless. And people have become relaxed. And we've begun to get closer and closer to danger, not even realizing that there is an enemy lurking around ready to throw a grenade on our lives. It's almost like we need a sign that says, the devil's not dead yet. The devil's not dead yet. Yes, he is defeated, but he is still alive and he is active today. And I don't have to convince you of the evil in the world or even the feelings and the uncomfortable thoughts in your own life that would prove that. But let's go on to the next file. If we know that the enemy is alive, let's actually name him. What is his name? The most common names are Satan or the devil, but there are many other names that we find in Scripture that are used to describe him. Some examples are Beelzebub, meaning Lord of the demons, the evil one, the prince of the power of the air, God of this world. And some names more so relate just to his character, like tempter or father of lies. But for today, we're going to focus and interchange between Satan, the devil, or simply the enemy. And so Satan means adversary or accuser, which says that he's anti-righteous and he's looking to accuse all others of being anti-righteous. And the devil similarly means slanderer or accuser. And so we often have this analogy of us being in this courtroom with God as the judge, right? And God is the judge, and the wages of sin is death. And so because all of humanity has sinned, we are all up for trial for death. Yet Jesus comes in, and he comes and he says, I will take your place. And the judge accepts. And Jesus takes our place, but we forget that there's someone else in this courtroom. There is Satan, the accuser. And he's trying to point out every single thing that we have done wrong. He's trying to convince God, hey, they are so anti-righteous. They are so against you. They are worthless. They deserve nothing. They don't deserve your grace. And thankfully, God cannot be convinced. And all of Satan's names, though, they reflect what he was doing and his terrible character. But it's believed that he had a different name in the beginning. He had the name Lucifer. If you're anything like me that was like a Disney princess kind of girl, you think Lucifer and you just think a cat. That's all I can think about when I think of Lucifer, is the gray cat from Cinderella, which seems fitting because cats are basically from the devil. But did I just create some enemies here? Just kidding, cats are fine, cats are fine. I don't personally need to have them in my home, but they're fine animals. But today, Lucifer has these negative connotations towards it. But it's almost like, you know when you have this name that you love, and you think like, oh, I could name my kid that one day, and then this other kid comes along, and they're so annoying. Teachers, you know this. They're so annoying that they ruin that name for you, and you're like, oh, that name is completely ruined. That was Lucifer. It was supposed to be this beautiful name, yet we know the story, and no one has named anyone that since. But Lucifer, it used to mean morning star or light bearer. And this is the name that God gave to him. And so with that, let's get to, what is Satan's origin? How was he created? Well, Satan was created by God as an angel. We read all about kind of Satan's history in Ezekiel 28. It's an Old Testament prophetic book, and it says this. It says, you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adored you. Your settings and mountings were made of gold. On the day you were created, they were prepared. You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till the day that wickedness was found in you. Now, this tells us a lot about Satan's origin. He was called Lucifer, morning star, light bearer, because his physical appearance reflected that. He was completely covered in jewels, and it was meant to be that these jewels reflected the glory of God. But often, as we think of Satan, as we think devil, we have these pictures of maybe a red man with horns and a tail and a pitchfork, right? We think dark, we think scary. Yet Ezekiel, it paints us a picture of something different. Last week, Pastor Ben, he was talking about angels, and he showed this TikTok video of we think what angels look like, versus how AI would create them based off of the Bible. And so I want to show you how AI would interpret what Satan looks like from Ezekiel 28. Watch this. Isn't that kind of shocking? That we think Satan is terrifying and dark and scary, but he's not. He's actually was originally created to be beautiful. He's almost like Ted Bundy in how he can use his beauty to entice us and deceive us. And it causes us to be attracted to him and to his ways, which is how he gets so many people. But not only was his appearance, according to Ezekiel, beautiful, but his original character was meant to be majestic. The jewels that were reflecting the glory of God, he was created specifically for worship. That was his job. That was his purpose as an angel, was to worship God and give God glory. Yet this origin story, it tells us so much more than just Satan was beautiful and he had this beautiful character, or at least that's how God created him. If we read between the lines, we get much greater information here. What we find is the fact that Satan was created tells us that he is not equal to God. God is an uncreated being who is perfectly good. And we think often that Satan then is an uncreated being who is perfectly evil. He's contrast to God. We think God is light and Satan is dark. God is day and Satan is night, but that's not the case. It's more so like God is light and Satan is simply the object getting in the way and casting a shadow. He cannot be compared to God. If we are going to compare him to anyone, it would be more accurate to compare him to the angel Michael, who is chief of all angels. But he has in no way a comparison or opposite that is equal to who God is. But let's get into the next file. Let's get into what his background is. Because we see that he's this beautiful creation by God, but we know that that did not stay that way. So let's get into Isaiah, where it tells us about Satan's downfall. It says this: "How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mountain of assembly on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit." Can you imagine in the beginning, Satan in there as Lucifer in the throne room of God, and he's worshiping God and he's giving God all the praise, and then a thought comes into his mind. Why am I down here and God is there? Why does he get to sit on that nice big chair? Why are all of us just attending to him? Who made him so good? Why does he get to be the Most High? I think I could do that. I think I could do that. And we find this is the beginning of his fall. And if we go back to Ezekiel 28, we read this in verse 17. "Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. So I threw you to the earth. I made you a spectacle of you before kings." See, the downfall of Satan, the downfall of Lucifer, was the downfall of so many of us. It's pride. He was made to give God glory, but he only wanted to receive all of the glory for himself. And there's this weird paradox here, as Jeffrey Grogan explains it. He says, "Nothing makes a being less like God than the urge to be his equal." And so God cast him to the earth, and we read in Luke 10:18, Jesus says, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." Satan only wanted to worship himself. And the interesting thing here is then God goes and he creates humanity, and humanity begins to do the very thing that Satan was meant to do. They worship God there in the garden, and he is disgusted. Satan's disgusted, and he's terrified because of it. And so what does any good enemy do? He targets the one who God loves most, his children, which takes us to the first incident report in the dossier. It says in 1 John 3:8, "The one who does what is sinful is of the devil, because the devil has been sinning from the beginning." We often think that Adam and Eve brought sin into the world. More accurately, Satan brought sin into the world. And we don't know when this beginning actually was, but we read about it first in Genesis 3, when Satan enters into the garden in the form of a serpent. So we know this story. God gives instructions to the first people. And he says, you can eat any tree in this whole garden, but there's this one tree that you aren't allowed to eat from. And of course, Satan sees this as his opportunity to begin his career as a professional deceiver. And he goes in, and he doesn't outright lie, but he manipulates what God says. And he convinces Adam and Eve to disobey God's one command to eat from the tree. And it's from that very moment that the war on evil began. God's response to Satan is a war declaration. And we read it from the Message version in Genesis 3:14-15. God says this to Satan, because you've done this, you're cursed. Cursed beyond all cattle and wild animals. Cursed to slink on your belly and eat dirt all the days of your life. I am declaring war between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He'll wound your head. You'll wound his heel. See, Satan wanted to be the most high, but he actually became the most low, crawling on his belly, eating dirt all of his life. And then the war declaration is this, that humanity and Satan would be at war with each other. But there would be one specific human, a human like no other, who would come and would end up defeating Satan once and for all. And that's where we get into our current progress. Where are we now? And where we are now is that Jesus has victory. It says in the New Testament book of Colossians 2:5, having disarmed the powers and authorities, he, Jesus, made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. Now, can you imagine the behind the scenes of Jesus' life on earth? Jesus comes fully God as a baby. And Satan's like, we can't have this happen. This is an important guy right here. And so he sent an enemy to come and try to kill Jesus. And this enemy killed hundreds and hundreds of babies along the way, but couldn't actually get to Jesus because God was protecting him. And so when that plan doesn't work, Satan starts a 30-year strategy to take Jesus down. He's like, you know what? Forget getting an enemy to attack Jesus. I'm going to get his own people. I'm going to get the Jewish leaders to be the one to do it, to be the one to murder him. I'm going to get an inside job. It's not going to be an outsider that deceives Jesus. It's going to be one of Jesus' best friends. I'm going to go and I'm going to discredit Jesus as a fool. All of history is going to think that he was just this crazy man. I'm going to go and I'm going to deceive him in ways that no one has ever been deceived before. And best of all, I'm going to make a spectacle of him on the cross. Satan's there behind the scenes. He's going, wow, what a great plan this is. But little did he know he was actually playing into God's plan. You'll wound his heel, Jesus says to Satan, only because of the power and the strength that Jesus will crush your head with. It's like Satan wouldn't even have enough power to wound Jesus' heel on his own strength. Think about it. If you were to go and kick an object, and you kick it really, really hard, and you end up bruising your foot in the process, you didn't bruise your foot because that object had strength or power. It might have been hard on the outside, which helped, but you bruised your foot because of the strength and power your kick had. And so Jesus, when he goes and when he crushes Satan's head on the cross, he wounds his heel only because of his force and the strength that he had. And that is the only reason that he was wounded in the process of the cross. See, God came down to earth as Jesus, fully God and fully human, to get as close to Satan's domain as he could and defeat him on Satan's home turf. And defeat him he did. And so, where are we now? Okay, Satan has been defeated, yet we've already looked. His status is alive. So what are we doing here? Where are we? It's more so like we are in this D-Day-like time. In D-Day in 1944, it happened on June 6th. It was a pivotal moment in World War II when the Allied forces launched a massive invasion on the beaches of Normandy. And this invasion was like none other, and it was known to be one of the greatest defeats, as they knew that it was the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. And people celebrated, but the war was not over. The fight did not end there. There were still brutal fights that happened all throughout for the next year until Germany's ultimate surrender on May 8th, 1945, and the official end on September 2nd, 1945. See, the battle has already been won, securing the victory of the war on Satan. But until Jesus comes again, we are still in the battle. We are still fighting, which is why God says to put on the full armor of God. And what that armor actually looks like, Pastor Todd will teach about next week. So I wish that we could just end there, call it a day. This is great, happy victory, but we have one more question to answer. What about demons? What about demons? Who are they? Where did they come from? And are demons real? Well, there's a few different theories about where demons came from, what they are. From where I've landed, I go to reference Revelation 12 to answer this question. It says, in Revelation 12, 3-4, "Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 thorns and 7 crowns on his heads. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth." So when Satan is cast out of heaven, this passage is telling us that 1/3 of the angels followed him. And it goes on to say later in verse 7, it references the dragon and his angels. And then in Matthew 25:41, Jesus says, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels." And so I would conclude that demons are fallen angels that are under Satan's rule. However, there are other theories if you want to look them up. We just don't have time to get to them today, but if you want to look them up and you fall in a different place, by all means. Because I think there's a better question to answer, and that is, are demons real? Because like Satan, many people are convinced that they don't exist. And I think one of the reasons that we're convinced of this is because when we think demons, we have a very specific idea of what they do and how they influence. We think demon-possessed. And if you're anything like me, that kind of freaks me out a little bit. And that confuses me, and I don't fully understand all of that. But that's not what we are talking about here. We're talking about strictly their existence. And they can work in so many different ways. But when we look at Scripture, when we look specifically at the New Testament, we find that Jesus taught about, he warned about, and he talked to demons in the New Testament. In the New Testament, demons are referenced 82 times, predominantly in the Gospels, but also in the epistles. And specifically, 1 Timothy 4:1 says, "The Spirit clearly says that in later times, some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons." And James 2:19 says, "You believe that there is one God." Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. So if we decide that demons or Satan are not real, the reality is we are either being deceived by Jesus or we are being deceived by Satan. Because Jesus taught that they are true. He taught that they are real. So if we are going to believe the teachings of Jesus, we have to conclude that demons are real. But again, how they work is a whole different message, so come back next week. So where we're going to end today is that demons exist. Satan is a very real enemy. Their tactics are manipulative and sly and confusing. And it could be that there is a very real tension that you feel in this room right now. It could be that you are all too aware of how the enemy might be working in your life. It could be that you feel such an incredible amount of shame that you know that someone is against you, trying to convince you that you are not enough, that you are not good. It could be that everything in your life just seems to always be going wrong. And you don't fully know why, but you're a follower of Jesus, and you continually ask Jesus to provide and to do things and work in your life, and you're like, I can't see him anywhere. Everything is going wrong. My relationships are ruined. My house, the finances, my friendships, everything just feels like it's falling apart. And that's just in our own homes. You look outside the world, and culture is a pretty scary thing right now. And you look and you see that it looks like Satan has more of a hold on culture than God does. And if you're a Christ follower in the secular space, you know that you feel different. And that feels like you are just so up against an enemy. How else would you describe it? You're up against an enemy. And we look, God, where are you? God, what are you doing? You know, we talk about Satan hiding in plain sight, but sometimes it feels like God is just plain hiding. God, where are you? But can I let God open heaven for us for a moment? In 2 Kings 6, there's a story. There's this king of a place called Aram, and Aram was at war with Israel. And the king of Aram, he would plan these secret attacks, and he would plan them in the secret place of his bedroom, and he would have just a few of his military people there with them, and in whispers, they would share what these attacks were going to be. And then they would go and they would implement these attacks, but somehow the king of Israel always knew about them. Somehow the king of Israel was always not in the place they heard he was, or he was on guard and he was prepared. And they're like, how is this happening? We're doing this so secretively, yet somehow the king of Israel always knows what we're up to. And they find that God, who's everywhere, was listening in on their conversations. And then going and telling the prophet Elisha what they were saying, and Elisha would go and tell the king of Israel, hey, your enemy is going to be at such and such a place, so be prepared, be on guard. It's an incredible way of how God is all-powerful, and God can prepare us for what the enemy does, but that's not even the best part. There's this moment where the king of Aram, he realizes what's happening, and Elisha is getting in the way, so he's like, I'm going to go kill Elisha. I got to get rid of this man so then I can get to the king of Israel. And so he plans this attack on Elisha, and they go in the middle of the night, hundreds of men and their horses and their chariots. And Elisha's servant, he wakes up and he sees that the whole city they're in is completely surrounded by the enemy. And we pick this up in 2 Kings chapter 6. The servant says, oh no, my lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. You can imagine the servant counting, going, 1, 2. I don't know about you, but I've only counted 2, and there's hundreds of them. Like, do we have a different metric for counting here? What are you talking about? And Elisha prayed, open his eyes, Lord, that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. The enemy was out there. Guys, this is big. The enemy was out there, but surrounding Elisha was a whole other army, double the size of the one of the enemy, on horses and chariots, guarding him. And the king of Aram and the enemy did not touch Elisha. It may look and it might feel like you are surrounded by the enemy. I don't know about you guys, but I've been preparing this talk for the past few weeks, and I have been so aware that I have a target on my back for speaking against the enemy. But we have a greater power on our side. We have a greater power, and sometimes we just need to pray this prayer. God, would you open our eyes that we may see? Let's respond in worship together.